Today we're going to be talking about an artist, one of my favorite artists. As you can tell, if you don't know who he is by the cover work and stuff, his name is Jim Aparo. Jim Aparo, or Aparo, not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, was a great artist. I think. I think he did a lot of stuff. He kept me in like going with the brave and the bold and stuff, which is something he did later on. We'll talk about it. But I think he was an important artist. I think he did a lot of great stuff, and goes on vastly, probably somewhat underappreciated compared to the other big names in the industry, that's the way it goes. He was definitely a grindstone type of person. He put his nose and he put his effort into doing comics, and he would stay on comics for quite a long time. I mean, he didn't do just a few spotty things and then move on. Anyway, below me is a picture of Jim Aparo. And as you can tell by the comic covers, these are books that he did work in. Some he did the covers to them, some he did not, but he did work in all of these books and many, many more books. So many that I can't even show them all. So anyway, let me go ahead and get into this, and we'll start talking about Jim Aparo. Jim Aparo was born on August 24th, 1932. He was raised in a town called New Britain, Connecticut. Never heard of it, but I guess there is a town like that in there. He grew up, I guess, obviously liking artwork. Not much about his early youth that I could find. But we did find that he took art classes at New Britain High School. And while also taking those classes, he also took courses at a Hartford art school. So he definitely wanted to do artwork, which I think was cool. Aparo was primarily self-taught by studying and copying comic books, especially of the age that he was doing it in, which I would assume would be like the late 40s or so. He drew his inspiration from characters such as Superman, Batman, and Captain Marvel Shazam. All great influences, in my opinion, especially done by the classic old artists of that day. He would then claim that the artwork that inspired him was by Alex Raymond and Milton Caniff. Alex Raymond is very famous for doing quite a bit of stuff in the 40s and doing newspaper strips, I believe. But and Milton Caniff, I'm not 100% familiar with his work. I should be. Of course, I'm older now. I can't remember it probably, but he was pretty famous in those days also. He would start his career later than most artists do. A lot of artists get right out of college, or boom, they're in like their youthful 20s, get a job, you're on your way. Evidently, he did not get that opportunity at such a young age. So he would then work in advertising. Advertising, I believe, locally in New Britain. He would send his art to various comic book publishers, but then he would do classic advertising stuff, for newspapers, catalogs, that type of thing. I kind of wish that some people could find some of that and maybe publish it. I don't know if anyone would really care, but it would be interesting to see what his early stuff was like compared to what he does now. And I guess one time he was on a summer vacation and he would run into a man named Dick Giordano. He would later on become the future executive editor of DC Comics in his later years. But he saw great potential in his work and urged him to keep going and not to give up. So he didn't. So in his early 20s, Jim Aparo approached what was then a pretty good-sized comic company called EC Comics. But unfortunately was declined. I guess they felt his artwork wasn't good enough for what they were doing. So he went back to doing advertising material in Connecticut. He was often, at that point, drawing fashion illustrations for newspaper advertisements, things like that. But he kept on trying. He would readily keep submitting material to comic book companies, the newspapers and stuff, to try and get a job doing comic strips. And he would eventually get his first big break drawing a comic strip in a newspaper at the Hartford, Connecticut. And he did it for about a year. And it was called Stern Wheeler. And it was written by Ralph Canna. Now, he only lasted a year and then he moved on. But it's nice to know that later in 1986, a small black and white comic company called Spotlight Comics got a hold of it, some of it, and reprinted it as a #1. They sadly advertised an issue 2 and maybe 3, but they never followed it up. Evidently, it didn't sell well. So later on in 1966, Charlton comic editor Dick Giordano, because that's where Dick went first before he goes to DC, would hire Jim on for comic book art. His first book there was a story called Miss Bikini, Love, L-U-V, in Go-Go Comics. And I believe that Jim drew all 9 issues of that short-run book. And that book came out in June of 1966 and ran through October of 1967. The next few years, he would do artwork on various titles in Charlton, some Western, some science fiction, some romance, the horror, pretty much across the entire line of his books before he started getting more regular type of work. One of the longer ones he did was an anthology book called Ghostly Tales. He did quite a few issues of those. But after that, a new book was coming out called Hercules. And he did not draw Hercules. The book ran 1 through 10. He drew the backup called Thane of Bargoth, an independent story away from Hercules in the back. And he did all 10. And from there, he moved on and got to work inside Captain Atom comics. He didn't draw Captain Atom. He instead introduced a new character they created called Nightshade. And those were in Captain Atom 87 through 89. So it was only about maybe 3 or 4 issues of that. And then after that, he went to and created a new series, a Western series called The Wanderer, and it was put inside the back of the Cheyenne Kid and ran from 66 to 88. So he actually did quite a bit there. That's a good long run, about 22 issues long or so. And he finally would end up on one of their bigger selling books at the time, which was called The Phantom. And he did issues 31 through 34 and 36 through 38. Now, during that time, in 1970, when the Phantom was, pretty much winding down and he was drawing it, Jim Aparo would be given a job by the new editor of DC Comics and a friend, Dick Giordano. And he would then be given a book initially called Aquaman, first series 1 of the Aquaman books. And he would start with issue 40 and stay on the book until issue 59 when, sadly, it was canceled. But during that time, he would also continue to do the Phantom books at Charlton's. Now, just a side note, when he worked for Charlton and also for DC at some point, he was one of those rare artists that would draw the book and then he would ink it and also letter the book. And you don't see a lot of them doing that these days. So I thought that was quite a thing to know. But anyway, after Aquaman canceled out, he would go to work on The Phantom Stranger, personal favorite character of mine, and I liked the book a lot, the original book. And he would do issue numbers 7 through 17 and 19 through 26, and then covers from 33 to 41 when sadly it was also canceled. And he did some short works, in some of their ghost books like House of Mystery 209 and House of Secrets 93 through 97 and 105. But from there, he would make the great leap, and this is what, in my opinion, propelled him into, becoming a big artist for DC. He would go and draw in 1971 The Brave and the Bold number 98, and that came out in October, November of 1971. It was a Batman team-up book, and his first team-up on it was Batman and the Phantom Stranger. Well, imagine that. Right after Phantom Stranger gets canceled, he gets to do a Phantom Stranger Batman book. And I wondered if that was probably why they grabbed him, because of his Phantom Strangers, which was great work, by the way. He was then did a great job on it, or they really liked what he did. He was assigned the book starting with issue 100. And Brave and the Bold would run from 100 to 200, and Jim Aparo would draw pretty much most of that series. He didn't do around maybe 20 issues or so, and a few issues he inked only over someone else. That's quite an impressive run. That ran many years because that book was bi-monthly for a while. So, but just for kind of a fun note, Brave and the Bold 124 should have a cover copy here for you to look at. Jim Aparo actually co-starred as himself in the comic. He was part of the comic story along with the writer Bob Haney and the editor Murray Boltinoff. And this would be a team-up with Batman and Sergeant Rock. And he drew himself in it, and they participated in the story, and I thought that was kind of fun. But he was on that book for like around 10 years. That's a long run. It really is. Not many artists can do that anymore or want to. But during this time on Brave and the Bold, which was bi-monthly, that means he had free time, and that means, hey, we can find more work for Jim to do. And so they did. They put him on one of my favorite comic series, Adventure Comics. Adventure Comics, if you didn't know that, became very popular when the Legion of Superheroes was in it, but they eventually moved them off into their own book and wanted to start doing other types of things, feature different heroes. So he came on with Adventure Comics number 426 and 427, and it was on two stories called The Adventurers Club. And it was a group of interesting people that would investigate strange events that occurred in the world at that time. Sadly, it only lasted a couple of issues, but it was good for me because right after that, he would jump to issues number 428, 440, and it would feature one of my favorite characters, the Spectre. This run of comics ingrained me to find Spectre and want to learn all I can about him. And it was great. It was awesome. It was some of his best work. Stories were awesome by Michael Fleischer. It was a great book. It did last for a short time, but then was canceled, I think, due to the fact that I had heard back at the time that it was canceled because, stories were fairly violent for what was going on at the time. I don't know if that's true or not, but it wouldn't surprise me. And so 3 stories that he drew never got published. But that not sadly, but happily, in 2005, DC would release a book, a collection of all these Adventure Spectre stories called The Wrath of Spectre, and they would include those 3 missing Spectre stories, which I immediately glommed on and got because I wanted to have and read those 3 stories. So anyway, after Spectre cancels after 440, he would continue on Adventure Comics from 441 to 452 doing Aquaman stories. Yep, that's right. Aquaman came back, give another shot in Adventure Comics, and thankfully they brought Jim Aparo to do it. And after 452, he would take a short break and return on Adventure, doing with issues 459 through 461 and 464, which featured Dead Man. It's a Dead Man series they put in there, and it was done very nicely. It's really good stuff, and I like Dead Man. He's a great character. Wish they did more of that. Also during this time, he took on a miniseries that came out called The Untold Legend of Batman. It was just a 3-issue miniseries. He would ink the great John Byrne pencils in issue 1, and then he would draw and ink issues 2 and 3. He was also invited to be one of the artists in Justice League of America number 200, a big, thick celebration of 200 issues of the Justice League in March of 1982. When Brave and the Bold was being realized was going to be canceled finally at issue 200, he teamed up with Mike W. Barr, and they created a new series to replace the Brave and the Bold called Batman and the Outsiders. And these guys would introduce some new characters into DC that are still around. And they would be Geoforce, Looker, Halo, Katana. And they would be the newer characters. And this book was an attempt by DC to kind of modernize team books a little bit, kind of get them out of the old 60s and 70s thing. And so they thought this was kind of going to be different and interesting. And it was. It was well done. I liked what they did. They tried new stuff. Jim would go on to draw issues 1 through 12 and 16 through 21. Now, just a side note, I probably shouldn't waste your time with this, but I thought it'd be interesting to let people know what happened during this time. DC wanted to do an experiment because comic book stores during this time were becoming kind of a big thing, and newsstand material was starting to die off. So they would go ahead and do an experiment on a book called Baxter Paper. The main artist and main writer and artist would leave the current book to draw this newer, more expensive book using the high-quality paper called Baxter. It would only be shipped to comic stores and would not be shipped to the newsstands using Baxter paper. The Batman and the Outsiders title would then be retitled at number 33 as The Adventures of the Outsiders and shipped to comic stores and newsstands with new content. With issue 39 of The Adventures of the Outsiders through 46 would reprint the stories from the Baxter book that was shipped only to comic book stores, and that would go to the newsstands. That was the experiment, because they make more money off reprints. So during that time, Jim Aparo left the book of Batman and the Outsiders and took on the new Baxter book Outsiders in November of 1985. He would draw issues 1 through 7, 9 through 14, 17 through 22, 25, and 26, and the book ended on number 28. And I would think that might be due to the fact that they removed Batman after all this experimentation went on. Batman would leave the group and it ran on its own. And it was good, but I think that the characters just didn't grab a lot of people. There was no really super strong character, I think, to keep the interest up like Batman. But I could be wrong. I mean, I'm just speculating. After this, Jim Aparo would then move on to do the pencils for the Batman book, starting at issue number 414, and Detective Comics number 437. And he would last on both these books until 1998 and 1999, respectively. That's a hell of a long time. Now, he didn't do every single book. He would do big chunks of it, but then would take time off and then, do some other stuff. During this time, it should be noted that along with Len Wein, the writer, he would help create Sterling Silversmith, who was a pretty big character back in those days. He would also be involved in and drew some critically important stuff, I thought. He doesn't get credit for it. They just always talk about what happened in it. But he would draw all 4 issues of A Death in the Family, which features the death of Robin, Jason Todd Robin, by the Joker. And that was an interesting book, because of the fact that we got to vote on whether Jason Todd got to live or die back in those days. That was kind of fun. And then finally, he would be involved in drawing, and I believe he drew the main issue of the Nightfall stories, where Batman gets his back broken by the villain Bane. And so he did those. And he stayed on, like I say, up until 1999, where he would leave. And after leaving those books, he was given his last really regular title that he would do, which was Green Arrow, issues 81 through 100. In Green Arrow issue 0, which showed up during that run, he would draw the issue where Green Arrow finds out he has a son named Connor Hawke. And in 91 of the series, of the Green Arrow series, Connor will don his first version of a Green Arrow costume and begin to fight crime like his father. Issue 100 would be the final issue for Jim Aparo. It seemed like he went into semi-retirement. His work kind of we didn't see much of it anymore, I'm sorry to say. But, he still did stuff. He managed to squeeze out a Batman Annual number 24. He did a Speed Force special number 1 in 1997. He did one issue of the Dead Man Dead Again miniseries, issue number 2 in 2001. And there are probably a few other things that I couldn't find or didn't see. And then he would just go into retirement, I believe. And Jim Aparo would then later die on July 19th in 2005 in Southington, Connecticut. Sorry to see him go. He would later be inducted in Eisner's Hall of Fame in 2019, 14 years after his death. I would have thought they could have put him in there a little earlier, but I'm not on the voting committee. I just felt that Jim Aparo was a good artist. He deserved this award for all the fine artwork he gave us during his career, and he did a lot. And I think his art is really nice. I could look at it time and time again. I still do. I'm going through my collection, putting stuff in order. I'm doing this Batman and the Outsiders right now, and it's fun. I have a hard time not working on the book, but reading the book. And I really did love his work. And again, as time goes by, a lot of artists and writers, inkers, colorists, you name them, they all get forgotten. They don't get reminded. People don't look for it because people aren't shopping old comics. And I find that a shame. There's a lot of great old comic work out there. His work especially is really good. His Brave and the Bold stuff was a fun book to read because it was always Batman teaming up with some unknown hero or even a villain every now and then. And it was nice. It was fun, and they were good. They were quality. And he is a quality artist. He was a good artist, and I loved his stuff. And that is why I'm doing this little thing on him today, because I want you to know about him. And maybe, just maybe, some of you might go out to your local comic stores or eBay or something else and find his work and maybe try it out. Maybe you can learn to appreciate or enjoy it as much as I did when I was a younger man. A lot of his stuff is reprinted in trade paperbacks. He only worked for Charlton and DC Comics. He never did any Marvel work that I ever found. So, DC, if you check out their trade paperback section, look for Brave and the Bold stuff. Look for Batman material from the, 80s and 90s. That's when he did his stuff. And you might find some stuff in there and you could enjoy it. So definitely check it out. Go online, eBay, like the Wrath of the Spectre, things like they're all on eBay. All the trades and stuff, someone's always selling a used copy if you want to just read it. So with that, I'll end this, and I'll thank Jim Aparo for all the great work he gave me. And he really kept a lot of comic books alive with his artwork. And I remember you, Jim, and always will. And for all of you out there, thank you for taking the time to watch this. Thank you.